So we're going to take a break from Luke. We've been in Luke since I started here in September. And we're only in chapter 8, I think. But it's okay, right? There's a lot of information in Luke. So it is quite all right. But it is good to take a break also and alternate and go into the Old Testament, because usually alternate anyway. And so this is titled The Choices We Make. And we're going to see at the opening chapter here, this sets the whole situation up. And so the king that we're going to see in a minute is going to make some choices that cause some problems for him. And it's good for Esther, it's good for some other people, but, he's kind of foolish. But we're getting into summertime, right? It's May, I think it's going to be 90, supposedly on Saturday, possibly, or something like that, right? So we're getting into summer. Memorial Day is only a couple weeks away. And so this is usually, at least, it's sort of slowed down a little bit, but, usually there's the big movie releases through the summer, right? And so all these things that we want to see, and we get this because we want to see these movies. And so, if you're looking at if they would make movies, and I think they have actually made Esther into a movie, and they made a few of these books, the biblical books, into either shows or movies. Esther is sort of this intrigue, spy, thriller kind of movie, right? You kind of see this is what's going on because there's all this court drama, there's all these things going on. But it's also about a group of people who are living among another group of people and how they not only survive, but they thrive, right? The Israelites have been taken from their home at the beginning of Daniel, right? Kind of the end of Jeremiah, beginning of Daniel. They've been taken from their homes, and they've been brought all the way over to Persia, kind of spread throughout the land. Now, the Persians and the Babylonians, they let them live sort of in their neighborhoods, right? So they had a lot more Jews living together, so they could kind of remain Jewish, versus the Assyrians, they would just disperse everybody. So you might be the only Jewish person living in the whole town, essentially, right? And so, but even that is one way that God is allowing and bringing back the Jewishness of his people and retaining that as we go, right? And so, but more than that, though, this story is about God's interaction with his people and also the world at large as well, right? How he controls and influences people who don't even recognize who God is, perhaps, right? Because God is greater than all of them, and so he is in charge of the whole world. And it's important for us to understand that as we go through life, that even though it may not seem like it, God is in charge. Because even in the book of Esther, the one thing it maybe a lot of people know about is that God is technically not mentioned in anywhere in the whole story. Like other places, it's like God shows up here, he talks to Abraham, God talks to Moses, God does this, God does that. Here, things happen, and we know that God is doing it, but it doesn't say God is doing it. But we still know that that's what's happening, right? Because he is behind all of the actions. He is behind the story. He is writing the story. He is controlling the story. And so in our own lives, when we feel like God is not around and we feel like we are left alone, we know that God is there with us, even though his name may not be mentioned. He may not have a big flashing sign that says, hey, I did this to us, but we know that he is still doing things. And we can take comfort in that. Because as we see here, the choices that we make sometimes cause problems, but God's got it handled. Right? And so we're going to go ahead and read Esther chapter 1, verses 1 through 9. Hopefully it's big enough to see. We got formatted that way, but it's fine. It says, these events took place during the days of Ahasuerus, who ruled 127 provinces from India to Cush. In those days, and the other word for this is Xerxes, so I'm just going to say Xerxes from now on instead of Ahasuerus, because it's hard to say. Right? So King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the fortress at Susa. He held a feast in the 3rd year of his reign for all his officials and staff, the army of Persia and Media, the nobles, and the officials from the provinces. He displayed the glorious wealth of his kingdom and the magnificent splendor of his greatness for a total of 180 days. 6-month-long party. You guys down with that? If you're not paying for it, sure, right? So at the end of this time, the king held a week-long banquet in the garden courtyard of the royal palace for all the people, from the greatest to the least, who were present in the fortress of Susa. White and blue linen hangings were fastened with fine white and purple linen cords to silver rods on marble columns. Gold and silver couches were arranged on a mosaic pavement of red felspar, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. So this guy's rich. And drinks were served in an array of gold goblets, each with a different design. Royal wine flowed freely according to the king's bounty. The drinking was according to royal decree. There are no restrictions. The king had ordered every wine steward in his household to serve whatever each person wanted. And Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women of King Xerxes' palace. And we're gonna pause there because that's the first chunk of this, because all this alcohol and drinking and things leads to some problems. So here's the main idea, right? So God can use our bad decisions for his purposes. Thank God for that. I don't know about you, but I've made some dumb decisions in my life. Right? But this is a word of caution. This does not let you off the hook. Right? It's just the fact that God knows when we're going to mess up and how, and he will fix it for us and also make us feel the consequences as well. Right? So, but the larger part of this also is the fact that one thing we need to remember in Esther is that this is all about furthering and propelling the Israelites into history, right? To keep them going. Why? Because Jesus comes from the Israelites. Jesus is a Jew. The Israelites have to be around for Jesus to show up. So everything he does, especially, is to keep them together and get them back to the promised land so everything else can happen. Right? So that is the kind of large theological idea in Esther that's kind of underlying this. So first, since we're jumping into a new book, right? So this is the title of it, Party Like It's 483 BC, because that is the time frame. And that's the first 9 verses. And so this starts a little bit of the background. And so the book itself is still up in the air if this is history, historical fiction, or just fiction. Right? And so history is obviously pretty easy. Historical fiction, if you like or have heard of The Killer Angels, which is a book by Michael Schirra, which is about the Battle of Gettysburg. They made the movie Gettysburg off that book, right? It's based on history, but some of the conversations and some other stuff like that is sort of made up. I don't want to say made up, but it's sort of filled in, right? So that may be something like, that's the historical fiction category. Or some people just think this is completely made up just to make the Jews happy and they just wanted to have a good story. So a lot of people, there are a lot of details, though, that lend this to be in the realm of more history than fiction. Right? So we want to say that we trust the Bible, we trust what is in here is real, and it's here for a purpose. So what they're doing, these people lived here, this is a real thing that happened. And just like a lot of the stuff kind of archaeologically, there's stuff in here that doesn't make sense to us that if it happened and they wrote it down, but we lost certain pieces of it, so we don't understand it. But just like archaeology, they start finding things like, hey, we found this rock that has these things on it. It actually proves what the Bible said that we didn't know about at the time. Right? We talked about it with Luke, where he named off certain people, and they said, well, those people weren't in charge at the time. And then later, recently, a couple years ago, they found some writings that said those people were in charge, just like Luke said 2,000 years ago. Because why? Because Luke was there and we weren't. So the people that wrote this down were there, and we weren't. So we'll take it on faith, we'll take it on trust that the people were writing the right things down. So there are details that confirm the historicity of this story, right? The character of Xerxes, the extent of his empire that we just saw, how large it was from India to Kush, so that's like Ethiopia. That's how big his empire was. The capital city of Susa, the details of the customs of the court that we see throughout the book. We're even going to see something about the excellent postal system that the Persians had in chapters 3 and 8. Different rules about mourning, the death penalty of hanging, even the word Puro, which comes from, which the festival of Purim comes from. All of these things happened. All of these things were proven in history. We know that this stuff is true. So whoever wrote this down was smart enough to know that stuff, right? Again, they were there most likely, or right around it, so they could write it down. There's even a gap in the 3rd year of Xerxes, which comes in verse 3 of chapter 1, in the 7th year, also in verse 2, but it probably explains the Greek campaign that he was on from 483 to 479. And what was happening at that point? The Battle of Thermopylae. So if you know anything about the Greek history, 300 Spartans held off the Persian army long enough for reinforcements to arrive on this very tiny little spit of land that kind of curves on the coast. So the Persians were coming this way, the Greeks went this way, and they stopped them long enough to have all the other Greek city-states come in and be able to help out. And it's, if you don't know anything about it, a lot of historians say this is the battle that saved democracy for the whole world, for the encroaching Persian Empire. So these are all real events that are happening in time, in history, with all these things when this stuff is going, the time frame we're talking about here in Esther. And so Ezra 4:6 also provides other evidence of opposition to the Jews in the reign of Xerxes, right? So all of these things are going on, and we're going to explain as we go more in depth to this stuff, because I know it's a lot for some of this stuff, but we can know and trust that this is legitimately history. This thing's happened. And so this story takes place between 483 and 473 BC, so it covers a 10-year period. And so it roughly takes about 60-year break that exists from Ezra chapter 6 and then chapter 7, right? So there's time frames in between here that, like Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, they sort of all run together. And Daniel's in there too. And so we have some main characters. Hopefully you can see that. If not, so Esther is a Jewish woman. She is the main human character. Right? She is the one. The book is named after her. Right? It's about her for the most part. But it's about her and how she helps her people. How God puts her in a position to help her people. Then we have King Xerxes, who is the king of the Persians, which is the world power at this time. Now we have Mordecai, we're going to see, who is Esther's uncle. He raises her. He helps her and he helps guide her through things, right? And then we have Haman, the Agagite, who appears in chapter 3. He is the big bad guy, right? He's the bad guy that shows up. If this were a movie again, he's the main spy or whoever it is who's conspiring to kill, because the Agagites are descendants of King Agite, who was an Amalekite. So if you go all the way back to Deuteronomy or Exodus, Moses and they're all the Amalekites attacked the people in the Exodus. They kind of attacked the back of the train, who was usually where the weaker, older people who couldn't move as fast. So they kind of bamboozled them and tried to kill a bunch of people. Right? So there's this long-standing feud for thousands of years now of hatred that goes on, and so this rears its head once again. And so the Amalekites were this group of people that God commanded Saul to destroy in order to get vengeance on the sneak attack. But Saul didn't follow the instructions. Again, we see these choices that we make. People make choices and they have repercussions. So Saul didn't follow through with what he was supposed to do. And so here we have this person coming back, this age-old battle once again. And so the Israelites and the Amalekites come front and center again to this book. But the problem is this Amalekite, Haman, he has the ear of the king of the Persians. So again, who is the most powerful empire in the region. And so being the most powerful, richest man, King Xerxes wanted to throw a party. So again, he throws a 6-month-long party and another one for the people, just for the people of the city of Susa, right? So, and it's not just a one-night deal, right? It's a week-long party to kind of close up the 6 months. So it's 6 months and a week of parties. No cost is spared. Everyone gets to party. Verse 5 says that all the people in Susa were present. They were partying. So Susa is in present-day Iran, and it is the city of Shush that now stands on its site. Right? So this city is a super old city, just like a lot of these other cities in that region. So during this party in verse 8, he says there's no compulsion, there's no rules. Every man can do it as he desires. He can drink whatever he wants. So the only rule is that there are no rules. Teenagers dream, a parent's nightmare. And we also know that Queen Vashti, his wife or his queen, also threw a party just for the women. But the king liked to show off. And so to some extent, everyone benefits from his wealth because he's sharing it, right? But like every good story, there has to be a problem that needs to be solved. And so we see this in verse 10. And so starting in verse 10, the author presents the problem. So it's this first problem is, how does a Jew end up becoming queen if there already is a queen, right? We're like, wait a minute, I thought Esther's the queen. Well, not yet. So we have to get the other queen out of there, right? So what does it happen? So in verse 10, it says, on the seventh day when the king was feeling good from the wine, Xerxes commanded Mehum, so all his people, the 7 eunuchs, so I'm not going to name all of them, who personally served him, to bring Queen Vashti before him with her royal crown. He wanted to show off her beauty to the people and the officials because she was very beautiful. So you guys who are married or have been married or whatever, does that sound like a good idea to order your wife to come up wherever you want her to? Yeah, no. Right? Verse 12, but Queen Vashti refused to come, to come at the king's command that was over by his eunuchs. And so the king became furious and anger burned within him because he was embarrassed by her, right? Now, she's not listening. Now, all of us think our wives are the most beautiful person in the world, but it doesn't mean we should parade her around. Right? Like, hey, no, it doesn't work that way. Also, the king was not making this best decision on a sober mind, right? It says he was merry with wine, or he was feeling good with wine. Right? So here we have this great idea that never happens. Those ideas never come from being inebriated. And so there's a lot of wisdom being shown in action here, or maybe the lack of wisdom. And he orders his eunuchs or his advisors to go over to the queen's party. And of course, these guys are going to say, hey king, this is not going to work out right. This is going to go badly for you. Of course, they're like, all right, king, we'll do whatever you tell us because we don't want to die either. And of course, the queen has other plans, and so we don't know why. We're just told in this version that she just refuses to come over here. Maybe she was busy, maybe she was tired, we don't know. You know, it's 6 months and a week of partying. It's pretty long to do anything, so she's probably like, I'm done. Like this, I just had a huge dinner party. We're not doing this. Maybe it was a long walk to the main room. Maybe she just didn't want to do it. Either way, she just says no. So here we have the most powerful person in the world, human-wise, we'll say. At least he thinks so anyway. Telling his wife that she needs to do something, she says no, and so he gets furious because he's not used to being told no. And his wife is probably the only person that can do this. But even then, it doesn't go well. But he may not have found himself in this predicament if he had heeded Proverb 31, verses 4 through 5. It says, it is not for kings to drink wine or rulers to desire strong drink. For they will drink and forget what is decreed and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Right? Drinking can affect our judgment. It can affect how we think, what we think about, what we remember, what we don't remember. And so this is kind of a direct relation of being unwise in relation to alcohol. And so his people, because she disobeyed him, they say, look, nobody's allowed to disobey the king. Not even your own wife. So you have to take action. Right? You got to do something about this person. Right? Because she violated the law. Right? This isn't just a parking ticket or a speeding ticket. This is like in front of everybody else, you didn't listen to what the king said. And so not only will she be an example to all the other women in the kingdom, and soon there will be an uprising, and wives will disobey their husbands, and chaos will ensue. Right? We're going to starve to death, guys. Come on. Verse 18 says, there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. And so this sounds similar to how the Egyptians felt about the Jews before the Exodus. Right? That's why they started killing some of the Jews, because they're like, we have too many Jews, we need to get rid of them. They're going to start taking over. The same thing here, the women are going to rise up, they're going to throw us out. Go live in our cars down by the river. All we have to do is fish. I don't know, maybe that's a good deal. Right? And so the king has to do something. He could either stand by and be dishonored in front of everyone and have a potential uprising on his hands, or he could think about it and maybe do something smarter, but he doesn't. Right? And so what he does is makes it worse. So verses 19 through 20 or 22. In verse 19, his advisors give the king advice. Fire the queen, find a new one. Genius. He probably pays these guys a lot of money too. All right. And so it seems that the unspoken part of the rule is that this would be the same fate for any woman who disobeyed her husband. And so if your wife didn't listen to you, you could just fire her. And actually, that's kind of what happens later when they're asking Jesus about divorce. What happened was that essentially, if you burned dinner, you'd be divorced. Your husband could divorce you if you burned his dinner. That's how down to the nitpicky stuff they had gotten with their law, right? So, this sort of foreshadowing what's going to happen, because that's how people deal and see with marriage. They think about marriage is like, well, if I don't like it, I'll just fire you. Or instead of working it out and, I don't know, suggesting a cooking class or something, but that's all equally dangerous. So maybe don't do that. But the king was angry, though, and he thought it was a great idea. Because of course he did. He was pretty well drunk after 7 days of reveling. But if he would have had some Jewish proverbs, he may have not made it worse, right? So Proverbs 14:29, whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. So he wants to fire her because all his advisors are saying the same thing. In Proverbs 12:18, there is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. It's easy to say things, right? Just kind of cut with your sword. But if you stop and think about certain things, like if he would have just pulled the queen aside and kind of got the story from her of why she didn't want to come, he probably could have got himself out of it. But both from her being in trouble, or her saying no, but also in front of everybody else. Maybe she was busy doing the dinner thing. Right? There's probably a good explanation for it. What's that?
She was burning dinner.
Maybe, right? I don't know. She probably was after that. Right? But Psalm 1, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. Right? He has the wrong people advising him about this situation. Maybe they weren't married. Maybe they didn't know, whatever it was. They were giving him bad advice. All they were looking at is like, hey, she disrespected you. You need to handle it. And so he fires her. And it's pretty crazy. But the Persians had excellent communication systems that they could get the decrees and news out rather quickly. They also allowed the conquered people to retain their native language, but it also seems like people would end up learning multiple languages. So this decree or bad news or bad decision goes out across the kingdom. The queen is gone, and her job is open. Because that's what the decree said. Like, hey, I don't have a wife anymore. I need a new one. So whoever you want to send from your town, we'll pick the beauty queen from Orland and we'll send her down to Sacramento and put her up for the job interview. Right, that's what this decree is saying here at the end of the chapter. The king and his counselors approved the proposal. He followed Memucan's advice, and he sent letters to all the royal provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each ethnic group in its own language, that every man should be master of his own house and speak in the language of his own people. Right? Because he also was saying, look, wives will honor their husbands, from the greatest to the least. So he made this decree that wives, you have to obey your husbands. And that could be good or bad. Right? The chapter ends on a note of suspense, preparing the reader for this next episode, this next chapter, which, if you have the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible, the title is Search for the New Queen, and that's where Esther is going to come in, right? But we have this problem that now the old queen is gone, and so we see how we see the opening for Esther to get in there, right? Because now the reader knows that the new character is indeed needed to replace Vashti. And so, of course, we, being smart people, know that this is about Esther. That's what's going to happen. So we know that God uses his people in their storylines to move his story along. Right, we see that this is how God is in control of the situation. Even the dumb decision by King Xerxes is beneficial for the Israelites and for the world. Because again, remember, the Israelites bring about Jesus. Right? That's the whole thing. We're getting towards the New Testament area. The Messiah will come later. Right? We know it's going to be a woman like Miriam, Deborah, Ruth, and others before her. The new character in the story will emerge as a heroine of her people. And thirdly, though, God is present implicitly but not explicitly, right? Already the reader anticipates that Xerxes as a Gentile will be superseded by God's sovereign choice of a new queen, even the Jew Esther. Right? Because we know that Xerxes values beauty, and we're going to see that Esther is super beautiful, apparently. But we read this and we see this, okay, great story, but like, what do we do with this in our lives, right? How does this help us with what we're trying to accomplish when we're living in the 21st century, right? So the first thing we remember, though, is that God is a wealthy king, right? We had the description of all the gold couches and the linens and all these things to help us understand how rich the Persians were. But by comparison, God is beyond richer. He is beyond that of these earthly things, right? So he is a wealthy king, and he has no need for money, but he has riches and wealth at his disposal. And he will make us wealthy as we need it to do his work. Are we all going to be rich, like millionaires or like King Xerxes? No. But God provides what we need for us. So Deuteronomy 8:18 says, "But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth, and that he may confirm his covenant which he swore to your fathers as it is this day." Right? He was blessing the Israelites as a whole here in Deuteronomy because they were accepting the covenant and moving into the promised land. But it also comes to us, he has equipped us to work. He has given us the power to make us wealthy. We all have different things that we do, our jobs and our civilian or our secular lives, that God has provided us a way to make these things happen. He provides us with things that we need. Sometimes even when we most need it, things just show up a lot of times. Right? This isn't just name it and claim it like, hey, God, I need a new Mercedes. So if it could show up tomorrow morning outside my house, that'd be great. Right? That's probably not going to happen. But God will provide you, as has happened in our lives, that God has provided us certain things at certain times when we needed it. Right? Even I think one time we got a random check from somebody for like $200. And that was whatever was going on, we needed it for something. And it just showed up in the mail. It was super random, but it happened. Can't explain it, don't know why, but I know why, because God's grace extends to us for these things, right? And it's super important we understand that and we see this. And so Paul tells Timothy, "Instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy." Because again, Paul is writing to Timothy, who is in Ephesus, and Ephesus was a very large market town, a very, very rich town, essentially. So there are a lot of people in the church who were kind of showing off their clothes and doing all their stuff like that. You say, look, it's good you have money, but don't be a jerk about it. Right? Don't show off. Don't do these things. Like, look, and don't just put all your hope that you have all this money in the bank, because it can go away really quickly. But fix your hope on God, who richly supplies us all with the things to enjoy. And that's good that we have that idea that we're not worried about our bank account, we're worried about our relationship with God. Right? That is the important part. And again, he tells the church at Ephesus, before Timothy or maybe right around that, he said, "I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened so that you will know what is the hope of his calling, what are the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints." Because you see, we may not all be rich in money, but we have this rich inheritance of eternal life through Jesus Christ. We have this eternal life that you can't give back. You can't even pay for. If we had to go to the store, if you went to the store and say, I would like to buy one eternal life gift card for me, you couldn't pay for it. It is uncountable. There's no price for it. But Jesus Christ paid that gift card essentially for you with his blood. And each of us have been given that gift card essentially. And we turn it in when we get to heaven. That's how we're spending it. Right? That is the most priceless thing we all have in our bank or our house or stick it under the mattress, whatever it is. That's what we have. And that's amazing because he is also, not just is he rich, but he is gracious. He is a gracious king. And we see this, again, with Xerxes. He's very gracious. He wants to make sure everybody has food, everybody's eating at the parties, everybody's enjoying themselves, everything else. He doesn't want to be too mean and say there's rules to this place. It's just whatever you want to do. But God is even more gracious because he has rules and guidelines because he does love us and he does have grace for us. Right? And see, it may seem wrong to us that God takes the opportunity to get this person onto the throne and Vashti pays the price, right? So we might be like, oh, that's a terrible thing. But God has other plans for Esther. He has plans for Vashti. And so, because Vashti could have been executed. She probably should have been executed according to what his advisors were saying. Like, she broke the rule, man. Get rid of her. But luckily, she was just exiled. So even in that, we see grace being shown to somebody who disobeyed the king. And we have also, just like Adam and Eve, they were exiled from the Garden of Eden. They were kicked out of the kingdom, but God did not kill them. Just like it said, penalty is death. But he said, nope. Who died or what died? Some animals died to be able to clothe Adam and Eve before they were sent out of the garden. It wasn't Adam and Eve, it was something else. Right? And that's a setup for who else dies for us because we are all disobeying the king. But what do? We have grace through Jesus Christ that we are bought in and we are allowed to be brought into the kingdom or come to the kingdom when we pass away. And so God even shows grace to the non-Jews as well as providing the person to get in the position of power to save the Jews. And so God has so much grace that he can give it away and spread it to us and he's not even missing anything. Because not only is he gracious, but he's also wise. I don't know if how people you've worked for or people you've encountered in your lives, sometimes you know that they are not wise, they are not making good decisions, and sometimes, hopefully, it's hard for you to follow them. Right? So I have a problem, I have a thing in my personal makeup, apparently, where if I don't trust a person or think they're wise or smart, I have a harder time following them. Right? It's things I work on, but and I've encountered people that aren't good leaders, that make dumb decisions, and it usually messes it for everybody else up. Right? So I don't want to be on that bus. Right? You see the bus like, oh no, this is bad. But God has ordered his world, right? God, if you're going to follow anybody, follow God. Because he is not going to make dumb mistakes. He is not going to make any mistakes. He has everything already played out, laid out. He knows exactly what's happening. We have free thought and free will to do things. And God, the king was chosen through this, and so we see this, what's going on, but we also know that God is taking care of it, right? When we make bad decisions, things will be taken care of. God knows what is going to happen. He gets us down the path where he wants us to go, and then he corrects the outcome into the correct outcome without violating our sovereignty. Again, we make a decision, he says, okay, fine, you have to deal with these consequences, but I'm going to bring you back over to the path also. Right? You'll be punished or you'll be corrected, and you'll be chastised, you'll be brought back over to understand where you went wrong. Right? He uses his wisdom to save his people. We are going to see that the right people know the plan at the right time. And so the Israelites make it through everything in order to get the history to Jesus' birth, his life, his teachings, and eventually his death and resurrection. Right? Again, that is the whole point of the Bible, is to talk about the Messiah, how he gets here. But just like us, the story, not everybody knows when or what is going to happen. They are just stuck under the rule of Xerxes. And they are waiting to see what happens because they know that the exile is only going to be a certain amount of time. Right? It was going to be only a certain amount of time they were going to be exiled, so they knew if we wait long enough, it's going to happen, we'll be back. And so this is true of our lives as well. We are living in the middle of a story of history, waiting to see what is going to happen, and we don't really know what will happen until it does. A few weeks ago, we talked about the prophecies and people like, oh, the eclipse is going to bring all these things, all the other stuff. And it's like, well, maybe not. Right? Because it could be, but we don't know. Right? But so we don't know until it happens and we kind of put the pieces back together. Right? Hindsight is 20/20, biblically especially. So wrapping it up for this chapter. So God is in this story even though he is not mentioned. He is in this whole book. He is probably in this book more than any other book in the Bible almost, it seems like, when you start reading it. Likewise, God is in your life even if he doesn't show himself in the flesh, so to speak. Because I know some people want to say, well, I'll believe in God if he shows himself to me. Well, he can. He can just pop up here and do whatever, but he probably won't, and I can't make him do that because he's not a genie that you just call out of the bottle. Right? But he is still ruling his universe. He is still making things happen. And again, if you go back to say what happened in your life, when you start saying God did these things, everything starts to usually make more sense. Right? If you look back and just think your life is just a random bunch of happenstance and weird circumstances, yeah, it's going to seem odd. But when you start looking at it going, oh, God must have done that. God must have done that. God must have done that. Oh, God exists. Oh, God is working in my life for me to bring me to this point of whatever. Right? That is what he is doing. He is ruling his universe for the benefit of himself and by his grace that he extends shown down to us. Right? And so the things we can do are be patient with God's plan. And this one's a little bit harder, so maybe change the word be happy to be joyful. Be joyful with God's plan. Because sometimes we can't be happy. It's harder to be happy sometimes, but we can be joyful with God's plan, that we see what's going on. We understand what God is doing at some level. So as J. Vernon McGee says, providence is the hand of God and the glove of history. Right? And in the drama of Esther, we see his hand at work on every single page. And so we're going to see this idea of this history and everything, how it's unfolding over the next 10 weeks in Esther here. There's 10 chapters, so it's actually a week per chapter. So we'll take it pretty much all the way through, most of the way through summer. All right, so God is present in the book of Esther. God is present in your life, even though it may not seem like it. All right, so we're going to go ahead and transition to